Vaughn. Okay. Mr. Chair,
Yep.
I just got a text from our mayor saying she was in heavy traffic, probably from, there's construction all over, so I don't know. So just FYI, that was a minute
Okay.
ago or 2 minutes ago.
Is she on her way?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I'll ask her for her ETA.
For some reason, there's a typo.
Got a Julie's sign shop for that today.
The what?
Sign shop?
Where's it at?
And it's Trevor who's attached
Oh, I just printed that off. I just saw that.
right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Text me the address and the time.
Vice chair, the remote
That's for you.
vice chair.
So, I have a question, not well, it's not
Yeah,
a
I
question
don't
for you.
know how.
The gradual
I'm gonna
takeover
tell you
just
before
fine.
we start here. I am going to recuse myself from this.
Eventually, everyone thinks you are.
You talk to Michael because he says he doesn't think you have to.
I'm not gonna serve two masters. I'm not gonna vote against Washoe County. I'm not gonna.
Okay. And I don't think we're voting on that. Okay, you guys ready?
what they asked, she asked that they call her, so I'll
So
just.
anyway,
I'm gonna recuse myself because I can't, I mean, if I asked you to vote against something in the city of Sparks.
Oh, okay, okay.
That's a good thing. I don't vote.
Yeah. No, on this board,
Okay.
on this board.
No,
Or
I
an
know. No.
RTC. And
I-
it was
I get you.
something directly on the city of Sparks. And
I
you're
get
like,
you.
I can't.
We're gonna move that up, by the
Right,
way.
wrong, and
We're
different.
gonna move that up.
Right, wrong, and different. Doesn't matter what's right. It's all I'm saying is I can't make
Okay.
it. They tried to.
Her number is,
I know you told me about that. Yeah. Okay, you guys ready? What is she doing? Okay, I'll call the order to the Truckee River Flood Management Authority meeting of August the 9th, with a roll call, please.
You got it.
Ron Smith,
Here.
Donald Abbott,
Here.
Jeannie Herman, Ron Hartung,
Present?
Naomi Dewar,
here?
Hillary Sheeby is hoping to be present on the phone as soon as I get her to call in. We do have a quorum, sir.
Okay, if you'll all rise for the national anthem, for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Mr. Abbott, would you lead us?
Yes, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do you want to sing?
Oh, say.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to open up the public comment. Anybody in the audience that's wishing to speak, would you fill out a card, please? And my first speaker is Kathy Brandhorst. Come on down, Kathy. Which
She's
would you
left
go?
the chamber, Mr. Chair.
She's left, okay. Anybody else in the audience wishing to speak at this time? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the authority. Approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second?
We've got a, Jeannie, go ahead. Ms. Herman.
I would like to suggest that we put the OPEB item up front.
Number 4
Yeah,
up in front of number 2.
That's the chairman's purview.
Yep, that's fine.
Thank you.
Okay,
Your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and dial again.
And furthermore,
okay. So we have an amendment to the agenda. Looking for a motion.
I made the motion.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please vote. Please, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously. Okay, approval of the draft minutes of July 23rd, 2019 Board of Directors meeting.
so moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Mayor Sheevy, are you there?
I am, and I will be there probably in about 3 minutes.
Okay, all right, well, hang on the line.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Announcements and clippings, Jay.
Yeah, as I sent you a notice, and for those that are out in the audience know that I will be retiring basically at the end of this month. My official date is December 2nd, but the last day for me to be here all, full-time will be the end of August. I just want you board members to know how it has been a privilege to serve you. I have done that to the best of my ability. So let's see, also on a more business-like note, George and I went down to Sacramento a couple of times, and we have been trying to negotiate with them on the various projects we have, and thinking we're making a little headway. In order to ensure that that headway occurs, our lobbyist, Steve Stockton, who works for Marcus Faust, prepared a letter. Actually, he told us that the Assistant Secretary of the Army will be touring the Folsom Dam facility mid-month, this month, so probably next week. And he wrote a very, very nice letter asking for our agency, was for my signature, for our agency to meet with him. And it got, there's a lot of communication. I haven't heard whether or not they're going to give us an audience, but if they do, then George and I will be going down, and we could conceivably be going to Sacramento and San Francisco as well to meet with General Collison of the division and Colonel Handura, the new colonel at the district office, before we meet with the secretary, if that happens. So that is a keep your fingers crossed type of announcement. So, but that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Okay, anybody have any other comments or questions for Jay? All right, we'll move on to number 4.
Well, Mr. Chair, I do have a comment since he just announced his retirement. I just wanted to say thank you for your service. It's been incredible. It's been an incredible run, both the first as my deputy and then running the agency. So, kudos to you. Happy retirement. Should be amazing. Thank you.
He's not done yet.
Yeah, he's not done
I
yet.
know, but
He's
you
still
said
the
this is,
director.
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
it sounded like it's his last meeting. I don't know.
The opportunity to roast him.
Okay.
That may occur, but it is probably the last meeting I will be at, unless requested. But I intend on turning over the day-to-day activities and meeting agendas to George and Mike and the rest of the staff. And I will be there to monitor and review, but that's as far as.
Okay. And you'll still be on the.
And I'm still,
December, right?
yes,
Yeah, okay,
that's
so we're
correct.
We'll haul you in.
Thank you, Director Dewar, I appreciate that. It has been a long run.
Yes, it has. Okay, we're going to move to the agenda now. On item number 4, report and discussion of the January 22nd, 2019 report, evaluation of the Washoe County fees from Bernard Vogler and Company. Lori, welcome.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you.
Okay, hang on one second.
if I may, I feel the need to recuse myself. I don't feel that I can serve two masters. I've been brought in on a number of occasions to stand between this, and it's been an uncomfortable scenario every single time, and I don't feel that it would be appropriate for me to vote on this item. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Lori.
Okay, thank you. I'm Lori
Welcome.
Williams, Senior Financial Analyst for Truckee River Flood Management Authority. Since Truckee River's Flood Authority moved from being a county department to a standalone local government agency, it has received its staff and support services from Washoe County. This is accomplished through the Assets and Services ICA, which is dated June 1st, 2012. From that date to present, TRFMA has consistently received professional, excellent assistance from Washoe County and its staff and its departments. So just want to make that very clear. The dispute is about how we pay for those services. Because TRFMA is funded by a 1/8 cent sales tax distributed as provided by NRS 377B, great care and much attention was used while crafting the Assets and Service ICA. This time was necessary due to NRS 377B's stipulation that the sales tax proceeds must only be used for flood management, prevention, and public safety. Devising a process for assessing proper charges and fees was an essential factor in drawing up the ICA. The process worked efficiently and effortlessly for 5 years, all through fiscal year 16. Then in preparing for fiscal year 17, the county ceased to use the ICA process for deriving a Schedule 1 for annual fees, charges, and reserves. That's how we pay for our services and our staffing. Washoe County failed to meet its obligation to negotiate with TRFMA on these charges and instead imposed fees and charges according to a modified process that it uses for pushing out its overhead and other post-employment benefit costs to its departments. We just started a 4th year without a negotiated Schedule 1 of annual charges. There's been no review or approval of these charges by you, the TRFMA board, and I would assume the county commission, since the board never signed the schedule. Staff's concerns are many. First, the ICA Section 4.01 regarding the negotiated Schedule 1 is being ignored. 2, charges for payroll expenses in Washoe County services are calculated based on a staff total that includes non-existent staff in vacant positions. This is not allowed according to ICA Sections 3.03, keeping in mind that these sections were added to make sure that the 377B legislation is enforced. Without a negotiated Schedule 1, staff cannot take annual charges to the board for approval, as mentioned previously. Since these expenditures exceed the executive director's $25,000 expenditure approval limit, we are permitting the county to withhold the charges in violation of TRFMA's board policy number 4, which is procurement. Additionally, TRFMA is being charged for services and OPEB contributions that are not utilized or incurred. And finally, since the overcharges are going to the Washoe County General Fund and perhaps an OPEB trust fund, rather than for flood or public safety purposes, these are misappropriations of 377B funds. TRFMA staff has brought these concerns to the attention of the Washoe County Comptroller, Assistant County Manager, and the County Manager. There has been no offer of cooperative discussion or resolution. And last February, Washoe County arranged for TURFMA to contract with Milliman for an actuarial analysis of its OPEB liability. TURFMA hoped to bolster its position in the dispute with the Milliman results. While Milliman instead used the Washoe County practice of calculating departmental liabilities and expenditures based on staff and vacant positions, TURFMA removed the non-existent employees and we employees who have no OPEB obligation because we were hired after the contract date that grants it to us. We affirm that we are paying 2 to 3 times the amount due in what is being withheld. In Bernard Vogler's fiscal year 18 letter to the board and the public presentation at the November board meeting of that audit report, partner David Shopper specifically pointed out Washoe County's practices of withholding funds for non-existent employees. TURFMA then engaged Bernard Vogler and Company to perform a limited analysis of the withheld charges and OPEB contributions. Bernard Vogler affirmed TURFMA's position regarding misuse of 377B funds and estimated the overpayment of expenses that it had reviewed, which was not totally comprehensive, to total just over $246,000 as of December 31st, 2018. Kathy Garcia, TURFMA's contract CPA and accountant, estimated the total to be more like $392,802 just a few months before, which was a total comprehensive review of all charges. In hopes of piquing discussion with Washoe County to resolve our dispute, the Bernard Vogler and Company analysis was delivered to John Slaughter by Executive Director J. Aldine on February 1st, 2019. A month later, Washoe County engaged Eide Bailey to review this report. 4 months later, an Eide Bailey report was released to TURFMA, and the Eide Bailey report makes many general claims, but it too makes no attempt to argue or resolve any of TURFMA's disputes against the Washoe County practices. Having unsuccessfully spent years addressing this dispute with Washoe County, TURFMA will now refer the issue to the Nevada State Legislative Council Bureau and possibly other agencies for review and action. And if you have any questions about the whole process, I'd be happy to answer them. We also have David Shopper here from Bernard Vogler, who did the analysis and wrote the report, here to answer any questions about that report.
Questions or comments?
Ms.
Stewart.
Yeah, so just in summary, it sounds like every time the county who was Eide Bailey working for?
The
Who was-
county.
The county. So each of the county's accountants kind of supported their position but didn't sort of get into the weeds in terms of trying to understand our perspective.
Right.
And if I got it, you're saying that we have overpaid about $400,000, $390
It's probably approaching that, since those numbers do relate back
to
some
December, November. It's been another 8 months.
Right.
So let me get this straight. So some of the staff at Flood pay into OPEB, and some do not, and some have their funds withheld by the county. Could you explain that?
What originally happened was there was recognition that starting as of June 1st, 2012,
Yeah.
Washoe County recognized in an email to Kathy Garcia, who wanted to document this whole liability issue.
At Southeast 49th Street.
She wanted to document.
I'm lost.
Sounds like the wrong state. Anyway, she wanted to document the liability, because in OPEB, there is what you pay now, and there is past obligation that you have not paid your fund up to.
And Kathy Garcia, again, is?
She at that time was our acting CFO. She is still a contract accountant with us, so
Okay.
she's still here with us.
Okay.
She actually got the whole situation cleared up, and it was determined that since we have so few people
Right.
in OPEB, the
Like how many?
retirement,
Like-
because so many of us were hired after the date that it was no longer offered.
Well, so how many do we
Like,
have in OPEB? 3?
I think presently you're not in it, are you? 1, 2, 3,
Like 3?
4.
Okay.
I don't know if Danielle is. Are you in OPEB?
Okay, well, anyway.
It's a majority of the staff. And so, anyway, they said, okay, we're just going to use the cow cap, which is their indirect cost rate.
Yeah.
And it's only for pay-as-you-go, the current year, what you'd pay for a regular person.
And just to recap for, I mean, a few haven't been on here the whole time. So the cow cap is like the county's administrative overhead.
It's a process for distributing overhead, yes.
And as I recall, they would charge like for use of facilities, use of IT, use of even legal services that maybe you don't use because you have your own attorney. And when you got that done in 2012, had you taken out like the attorney services and stuff that
Yes.
you didn't use?
Yes.
So you were just paying for services you use, like IT, phone,
Right.
whatever?
And that's the purpose for negotiations. In the beginning, at the inception of the agency, we depended on a whole lot of the services. We used a lot of purchasing, we used a lot of accounts payable, we used a lot of accounting, and as time wears on, we're doing it all ourselves.
Got it.
So, county council, the same kind of thing. So, but the big money problem here is the OPEB.
OPEB.
And what we were charged is just a flat rate that was pushed out through this indirect cost rate. And it was probably more than we should have been paying, but because it was recognized that we had no previous obligation, we would never have to contract with Milliman to have an actuarial study and so on, that was what we agreed to. It was just simple and easy and clean for everybody. But then in 2016, for fiscal year 17, they started using the Milliman report with not only the cow cap portion, but all of the liability and an enhanced amount based upon their actuarial study from Milliman.
And just to recap, you had some empty positions at that time, and they were charging you
Yes.
on all the vacant positions as
Yes.
well. And you had made, I think, Mr. Chair, a conscious decision to not fill those positions. You didn't need them anymore, the people retired, whatever. And so you were slowly shrinking your staff, but you were
Right.
still paying these big numbers.
Exactly.
Okay.
And previously, those were, it was just not a problem, not an issue. And then in 2016, for the fiscal year 17 year, they were included because that's what Washoe County does for its departments.
Yeah.
The departments have these vacant positions and they have the ability to fill them. We at TURFMA have vacant positions, but if it's not in our budget, we have no intention of filling it unless
Right.
it comes to the board. And at that time, we had no need to fill them. As a matter of fact, before the start of the fiscal year, the board was presented with an action to delete those positions, and they were removed. So before the start of the fiscal year, they were removed, but we've been paying for them ever since. They've never been taken out.
Ms. Williams, may I interject, because this was an issue back then. We had left vacant positions open so that we didn't have to go through the administrative process of getting a new position if we needed it. And there was no penalty for doing that until the county made this change in how they calculated the OPEB requirements. So as soon as I found out that that was going to happen, then we eliminated those positions. But it didn't seem to matter. Even though they were eliminated, we got charged that year for those positions as they were eliminated. It took us a month or two to get them eliminated. But the notion was, as soon as there became a penalty, that's when I deleted the positions, but not until then.
So is this all about the retroactive or trying to go retro and get reimbursement of monies that we paid inappropriately?
It's that,
And also go
and trying
forward.
to get the ICA enforced
Yeah.
so that we negotiate each year, yes.
Each year? And, okay.
And on top of the OPEB being overcharged for the two positions, all of the other services that we get from Washoe County are based on FTE. Well, not all of them, but the vast majority are based on the number of FTEs. So we've been paying for IT for two extra people, and, sorry. And, all the other services along that line, we've been paying for 2 extra people that we don't have, which is not a flood prevention, flood management,
Yeah.
or public safety
So
issue.
just 2 more questions, if I may, Mr. Chair. One relates to the Department of Health, whose employees I think are county too, and they may be in our same situation where they have an independent board, they have an independent staff, they're technically Washoe County employees for certain services, I think, but just, you know, it would be interesting to see, they may be in our same situation. They have a much larger staff. And number two, maybe you can address this. Your fix seems to go to the Legislative Council Bureau. And I just wondered how you thought they were the right people to solve this.
We had Kathy Garcia investigate what would be the process for this, and she found that that was probably the best route to go. So based upon that research and discovery, that's what we're proposing.
Mr. Walls has a comment that,
Perhaps if I could make one quick statement, Mr. Chair. Mike Wolz for the record. The underlying legal concern here is the use of 377B funds. As this board knows, that's how we are funded. The legislature limited the use of those funds to specific purposes, and that was emergency response facilities and flood. And so the underlying concern here is if these monies remain with the county and go into their general fund, they're now not being used as they're legally limited, which is why we're going to the state, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to get us in trouble if this comes out and find that we are misusing funds in any way. So that's kind of the horse that's been pulling this cart.
Got it?
there are basically two issues, and one issue is the enforcement or the working of the ICA with Washoe County. That is a dispute, and it'll probably still remain a negotiation for a long period of time. The other is the 377B. So the 377B funds, my thinking was, we wanted to have our auditors tell us that we had a problem, which they did. Therefore, we can take that problem specifically to the state, working out any other issues, because Lori mentioned several issues that we're having with Washoe County, but we wanted to at least get the liability and the problem of the 377B funds taken care of. That gets done through the state. We will continue to work as staff through all the other Washoe County issues.
Mr. Chair, one last thought on this, and I'm supportive of the staff's direction. Yesterday, we were at regional planning right in this very room, and the question came up about their staff, and they have a small staff also. But rather than being Washoe County employees, they are separate, entity employees. They're their own employees. And so at the end of the day, that may be a long-term resolution for some of these issues is, to do what regional planning does and just have their own. And a lot of small agencies get it through, there's an organization for small local governments and small organizations to do personnel management, OPEB, PERS, all of that. So if we continue to have problems, it's just another idea of how long-term to solve the problems, not the short-term.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Ms. Herman?
So that I understand, thank you, so that I understand this, and I'm a Washoe County Commissioner, so I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. So we're going to get a fair answer from the state, a third-party situation, because we got two parties that don't agree, right?
We're going to get their opinion.
Their opinion on how to proceed? And
That's the hope, yes.
That's the whole thing. Okay, well, I don't see any problem with
Okay.
that, because we need an answer to the problem.
Ms. Herman, maybe you can answer this, or can anybody else answer this? Is the county actually pulling their funds for OPEB and putting it into a separate account?
Yes.
They are, because that means the county and the flood project are basically the only two entities in this area that are actually paying into OPEB. And the county can't put that money into their general fund. You're not paying into OPEB unless you open up a specialized account for that.
Right,
And you can't take it back out.
An OPEB trust fund, but I don't know if it's a trust fund or a regular fund or what it is, but yes.
So the county is using a trust fund for theirs?
I don't know that part.
That was my
That's
question.
why
I want to know
said
if they're
it's-
actually doing it for
I wasn't sure
themselves.
exactly where it goes, but yes, it goes somewhere at the county.
Okay, Mr. Wolz, could you find out about that? Because they have to have a trust account to put that money in, and once it's in there, you can't take it out.
We'll look into that.
Okay. All right, any other questions or comments?
I just wanted to mention to Director Dewar that Perhaps the, was it Department of Health that you mentioned?
Yes.
They probably are like most others. They're contracted to receive their, as I understand it from discussing all of this with the comptroller, they receive all of theirs pushed through the overhead process, just as we are, except they don't get certain services pulled out. They just, they pay it
pay it all.
regularly. Yes. And the difference is that we have special legislation for our funding and they don't. It's general fund stuff. So it's a little bit different. And that was the issue, was that we are different and it causes issues for the comptroller's office. So
Yeah.
it's just going to be done that way.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, we're looking for a motion, and I think the motion has to be so you can present it to us again and also contact the state for arbitration.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to send it to the state. That's the way that the item is written. This is an informational, but it's agendized for action. Should the board want to give us direction and tell us to do something different than what we were planning to do? So,
Okay.
Just by way of explanation on the language there, the Assets and Services Agreement did have some language about conflict resolution. Those were the two mechanisms it had, either to hold a hearing in front of this board, and the county would be invited to come and present evidence, and you would be the decision-making panel, or in the alternative, we could hire an arbitrator as a third-party decision maker and have a binding arbitration and do that. Upon researching this, we feel we do have an obligation to give notice to the state. We don't know how exactly they're going to react. And so we may be looping back to these other resolutions depending on what the state does. But we put that on the agenda as a possibility in case this board decided that it wanted to move forward with one of those resolution methodologies.
So you want a motion that just lets you move forward?
We feel we have an obligation even without a motion to do so. Certainly, if the board would like to move and vote on that, we would willingly accept that.
Well, okay, I'll make a motion if you want, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Ms. Reed.
I would motion to direct the staff to follow all necessary steps, including going to the state to obtain resolution of this issue, and if they cannot, to come back to us with some further suggestions for action.
Okay, we have a motion, looking for a second. Second. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Lori. Okay, number 2, presentation discussion of NRS Chapter 377B, the Truckee River Flood Management Project, Truckee River 377 Infrastructure Tax Plan.
That will be me, Mr. Chair.
Okay, go ahead,
Mike
Mike.
Walls for the record. This comes at the request of Director Doerr. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on some of the, I guess, the controlling law and documents for the Flood Authority. Pointed, I guess, trying to address the issue of what it takes to expand the geographic footprint of the
Or
project.
contract or make a change.
Exactly. So there are 3 controlling documents. You have Nevada Revised Statute, Chapter 377B, which is the statute that funds this agency. You have the Washoe County Infrastructure Tax Ordinance that imposed that tax. You have the Truckee River Flood Control Project Infrastructure Tax Plan, which tells us what we can, and more specifically, what we can spend that money on. And then you have the interlocal cooperative agreement, which is how the authority to function was delegated to this agency. Chapter 377B limits the use of the infrastructure tax to projects for the management of floodplains and the prevention of floods and facilities related to public safety. That passed in 1998. That money could only be used for projects identified in the 377B tax plan, and that's a statutorily required document. In December of 1998, Washoe County imposed the infrastructure tax. That was actually a 1/4 cent tax. 1/8 of that went to the train trench project. The other 1/8 was for flood and safety infrastructure, and that's 1/8 cents is what funds this agency. As part of that was used to build the Regional Dispatch and Emergency Response Center and the Public Safety Training Center. The money to pay those bonds is taken out of the income stream by Washoe County before it gets to us. So we're getting somewhat less than the 1/8 cent. For the past 3 years, audited net sales have fallen between 7.9 million and 8.4 million dollars on that. The next,
Before or after?
that's net, correct, Lori? Yeah,
hang
after.
on.
That's after.
Hang on, Mr. Wills. Mr. Hartung.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Wills, I have a question. When you say somewhat less, it's 1/16. It's 1/2 of 1/8. Is that not correct?
No, it varies with how much we owe on the bonds.
Oh, okay, so it's not just an even split.
Right, that's
It's
correct.
just bond debt.
The bond debt gets paid and what's left over comes to us.
Okay.
I'm going to have to jump in here. I think there's a little bit of confusion. The quarter-cent sales tax was enacted by Washoe County, and that was split in half. So
Yes.
half of the quarter-cent came to flood, and half of the quarter-cent went to the train trench, City of Reno train trench project. And that was all just decided at the legislature, how this split would happen. That's why Washoe County went to the legislature at that time. It was right after the 1997 flood, and the 1997 legislature was the one that authorized this quarter-cent, and we all, not we, but our predecessors all went down and argued for that. My understanding, though, is that the 1/8 cent in the heyday generated about 9 million, and you're saying I don't know what you're saying it generates now, but it's on the balance sheet, 9 million or 8 million, whatever it's coming in now, and then a certain amount of that is used to pay the bonds for these buildings, which I thought were basically paid off, the buildings, but I don't know.
I'll direct that question to Ms. Williams.
So not a 1/16, and it doesn't vary. I mean, it's a 1/8.
It's 1/8.
We're still paying on part of the bonds. We did pay one off, but there are still a couple out there that are being paid, and they'll be retired, I believe, in 2036.
Okay,
Or
for not,
2028.
2028.
2028, because they were
Yes.
refinanced, yes,
Yeah.
2028.
okay.
Mr. Hartung?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Lori, when the bonds get retired, will there still be a maintenance fee that goes from that sales tax
No,
revenue?
all of the sales tax will come to the flood project. Everything that's no longer going to the debt will come to the flood
How will the
project.
training center maintain itself? Do we,
That's up to their current funding. We
Okay.
only have bonds to pay for the
The
construction.
capital.
okay, all right, thank you.
Okay. Michael?
The next major document that kind of controls this issue is the Truckee River Flood Control Project Infrastructure Tax Plan. That was originally passed in November of 1998 by Washoe County. It was very general at that time. It identified the Regional Dispatch Center, the Public Safety Center, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Truckee River Flood Control Project. That's how general it was. That has been amended on several occasions. And now contains just over 18 categories of various elements. Those are found in the report. I won't read all of those to you. I'll note some specific ones. It provides for levees and flood walls from Lake Street to US 395, terracing along the Truckee River, the relocation of the North Truckee Drain, some tributary levees and flood walls, ecosystem restoration in the downstream Truckee River, home elevations in some specific areas, and bridge elevations. Now, we have a map that kind of somewhat identifies that. This is a little different. In your agenda packets, there are 3 maps. The footprint of the project corresponds with these various elements. And that'll be of significance here in a moment. Every document up to this point, the authority to amend it has been granted to this body. So the infrastructure tax plan can be amended by unanimous vote of this board. Now, the Truckee River Flood Management Authority Interlocal Cooperative Agreement, or the ICA, is a document that delegated the authority over all of these other elements. As you well know, the ICA requires this board to do everything by unanimous vote. However, it limits the authority of this board to a geographical limitation, and I will quote this. The ICA conferred the function to TRFMA to regulate the flow and control of floodwater and management of floodplains along the Truckee River with respect to flooding along the Truckee River within Washoe County. And then in another location, again, says that it's delegated the authority to cooperate with other entities or agencies in the regulation of the flow of waters through the Truckee River and its key tributaries. In order to change the ICA, this board has to unanimously vote to do so. Then each of the governing agency and entities, Reno, Sparks, and Washoe County also have to vote to approve that change. So with the geographic limitation placed in the ICA, if you're going to expand that or change anything in those regards, you're going to have to get the approval of everybody.
Yeah. So
Now,
when you say the tributaries, I just want to be clear, the geographic area.
Ms. Stewart, would you wait and,
I'm sorry.
well,
okay, Mr. Hartung has a question.
Got it.
Then you're next.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we don't have to go back to the legislature to ask to change the geographic boundaries. We just have to get the consensus, the approval, as it were, of the three governing bodies.
yes, I'm assuming we're staying within Washoe County.
Yes.
So, but yeah, within that, you're absolutely correct.
It has to be approved here first, then it goes to the entities.
You know, it just has to be separate. I don't know that the other entities certainly could approve a change first, but that wouldn't,
Oh, okay.
it wouldn't, you know, everyone's got to do it. I'll just put, it doesn't say anything about the order in which that occurs.
But my impression would be that the Flood Management Authority would request a change, and then that change would then be agendized by each one of the agencies, the three separate agencies, and then basically, then it would become in effect.
We would expect that's how it would happen. However, and we'll be discussing this in a few minutes, when it came to the voting provisions of the ICA, there was an attempt to change that, and that started with Washoe County, and this board never addressed it.
Right.
So I don't think it requires that this board act first.
But I mean, I think wisdom dictates that this board goes back to the agencies of which we all represent. Each one of us represents an individual agency, and then we say, look, we think it's a good idea, because obviously if it doesn't pass muster here, if it gets turned down, then why go back to the other agencies?
Correct.
So that, I guess that's the question.
I agree with that.
We are saving power.
Okay. Ms. Stewart.
Yeah, thank you. I just was back on geographic area. You said the Truckee River, the tributaries that drain into it.
I don't think they said the tributaries.
Yeah, he did.
Yes.
It does mention tributaries, and there's no definition of that.
Yeah, so that was my question. I just didn't know. if
Which
we-
would allow us, I mean, you know, work that is done on, for example, the North Truckee Drain as
Yeah.
a tributary, or Steamboat Creek, that is allowed. How far up the system you would go there, there would be various arguments. That it's not defined, so
Okay.
I won't hazard a guess.
That's all I was asking. I heard you say tributaries, and I just wondered if those have been enumerated or named. You said Steamboat Creek, so lots of things come out of the Truckee River, all the ditches and so on, and only some things come back, and there's also upstream. I didn't know geographically. I know that originally the flood plan had project elements in California, you know, fish passage and such. So I didn't know if it was, you said Washoe County, but I know that there were elements a little outside of Washoe County. So I didn't know if it said specifically Washoe County and if it said specifically named tributaries or not. So that was my only question.
It does say key tributaries, so again, there's not a
Okay.
definition of that.
Okay.
Keep in mind that that there was an engineering intent associated with that, meaning the southern portion of the floodplain, Steamboat Creek, that's all influenced mightily by the river. Once the North Truckee Drain gets just above the river, it's no longer influenced and impacted by the river. So the notion was, it was always intended, but it was never written down as your counsel has explained, there's an engineering probably idea as to how far up a tributary
Okay.
a project would go.
Okay, I'm sure that's a negotiation or whatever, but you're just saying by law, it just says key tributaries. Okay.
Mr. Hartung.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let me get a little more clarification, Mr. Wolz. If it talks about and it contemplates waters that are trying to reach the Truckee River.
That's how I would define tributary, yes.
Okay, right. Well, Washoe Lake is trying to reach the Truckee River
Yes.
via
Right.
steamboat. And it's a controlled path, but it is still trying to reach the Truckee River. So here's my point, and here's why I'm asking this. At the WRWC, we asked for mapping, and there was basically two components of that mapping in terms of stormwater. And the two components essentially are waters that are trying to reach the Truckee River, waters that are not trying to reach the Truckee River, that are going to some other terminus basin, as it were. And so what I hear you saying is that we don't have the ability to create from this body, without going back to the legislature, a regional stormwater utility that would contemplate doing improvements in the North Valleys because that's not trying to reach the Truckee River. I know I'm asking you a lot
Yes.
here, and that may require more research.
I think that analysis is correct. I hesitate to speak in absolutes, but yes, if you have an area or a basin that is not tributary to the Truckee River, I think that you face a likely challenge to connecting it to the project without changing your ICA. That would be the remedy for that.
So the ICA does not have to go back to the legislature. We can take a vote here and then have each one of the three governing bodies address that. So we don't have to ask the legislature to change the footprint of the funding.
That's correct. If you want to use the money for something that is not flood-related or emergency response-related, you're going to have to go to the legislature. If it fits within that, then you're going to be looking at the 377B plan, and you're going to be looking at changing the ICA.
Okay, that's all I needed to know. Thank you.
Mr.
Thank you.
Hartung, could I add one more point to keep in mind? You're talking about a funding source here. If you're going to look at expanding the footprint of this agency to cover maybe countywide drainage, which I think personally have always felt was a reasonable approach, you're going to need another funding source in order to be able to complete the work within a reasonable amount of time. So even if you didn't change the ICA, you can still utilize the funding source provided by 377B and then have other funding sources to address the other issues throughout the county.
And I won't argue that,
Just
Mr.
a
Aldean,
thought.
and I understand completely. And the reason I bring this up is because of the equity issue. All taxpayers are funding this, and not all taxpayers are getting benefit. But we all know that taxes aren't fair. We fund lots of things that we don't get direct benefit from. That's just the
Okay, I
nature of
believe it. I'm
taxes.
not gonna-
And
Thank you, Mr.
I'll go
Chairman.
back to our authority is in fees. We can put fees in place on any of those projects.
Right.
That's correct. Ms. Stewart.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to respond to something Mr. Wolf said, something about safety and flooding. But I recall that the JPA, the Joint Power Authority, actually lays out in legislation, which was, I think, Senate Bill 275, if I recall, that it gave us fairly broad powers to address other related issues, river restoration, which is ecologic, recreation, watershed management, stormwater, and I guess I would ask you to kind of research that a little bit, how that bill changed our ability to not just deal with, say, a levee that deals with flooding, but other associated activities, so maybe.
Well, I can give you that language right now if you
Oh.
wish.
Okay,
So it can be used for the acquisition, establishment, construction, or expansion of projects for the management of floodplains or the preventing of flooding, or facilities related to public safety, the payment of principal and interest on notes, bonds, and other securities, the ongoing expenses of operation and maintenance of projects described in paragraph 1A and 1B, which was the construction, any program to provide a financial assistance to owners of public or private property in areas likely to be flooded in order to make such property resistant to flood damage that is established pursuant to NRS 244-3653. That's the home elevation program. And then there is a provision that allows for restoration as well in a separate section. So
Well, that's
it
what
is
I'm
a little
saying.
more expansive than I described just
Yeah.
because it wasn't the issue necessarily raised. But it's also not, you have to be careful on the breadth at which you can go too broad and step.
Right, I was
step
just
outside
trying to
that.
go to what the statute said that we can do or not do. And that's why, one reason I asked for this item was I wanted to understand, you know, what's our territory, what's our geography, what can the money be used for, what types of projects can we do? You know,
Yeah.
that's,
This does, you know, and having read that, it raises an interesting peculiarity in regard to the home elevation program. That is the one element of this that this board can, without going to the other entities, expand beyond the current footprint. And I won't bore you with the legal analysis of that, but the delegation of authority for home elevation was broader than it was for the rest of the
what you're
377B
saying
plan.
is-
Now, the problem with that is the deadline for accepting applications for the home elevation program was June 31st of this year.
right.
So the people that are in, and we can't accept any more in.
How many?
Well, unless the legislature changes that deadline.
Yes, we'd have to go back to the legislature, that's
Yeah.
my point, if you want to do something with the home elevation
Yeah,
program.
but, and you're saying that because the authority to do home elevation, it just wasn't home elevation, it was non-structural alternatives, was delegated, was a Washoe County authority, and then you're saying Washoe County delegated that authority to
And
this
the
flood board.
ICA describes that delegation differently than it does for the rest of the 377B plan elements.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, Mr. Hartung.
So how is it that the home elevation manual that's on our website, it dictates a very small footprint of what is eligible?
That's because of the 377B plan, which this board could amend the 377B plan.
I see.
That's why it's slightly different. You would still have to act, but you do not have to go to Reno Sparks and the county like you would if you were going to expand the footprint of the flood project as a whole.
But I still think that the whole scenario contemplated a riverine environment.
Okay, what was that?
Yeah,
I think home elevation, the whole scenario of home elevation contemplated a riverine environment.
It was specific to basically three areas: Hidden Valley,
Right.
East Side Subdivision,
Right?
and Rosewood Lakes.
Correct, which are all riverine environments. Water flows in, stays for a few days, water flows out.
Well, I'll just say, if I may, Mr. Chair, when I testified on behalf of getting that bill passed, we were pretty general. We explained the problem in non-structural terms, that the Corps was really pushing non-structural approaches rather than build a dam, elevate the home, right? And so you lose your responsibility for lifetime maintenance of this dam or a levee. And we went on behalf of all Washoe County. The companion piece of this bill was for water and wastewater. And we testified at that, you know, not to narrow, but actually to give this authority broadly, but we could look at the testimony. You know, you could just research the minutes and the testimony and see what we said. But Rosemary Menard went with me. We got loans for septic tanks, so if you want to transition your septic tank over to a wastewater system or your well ran dry, you could join up with a water system, and there were provisions for all that in the same bill. So I don't know personally right now, it was a long time ago, whether the home elevation was more narrowly construed than the other parts of the bill. So it's just something maybe you guys could research and let us know.
And we went the path of home elevation because it was much cheaper than the dam.
Exactly, like it was 10 million versus 60 million.
Right.
For the flood project areas in the Hidden Valley and then East Side subdivision.
Okay. Did you want to say something? No. Okay, Michael?
That's all I have. unless there are
Okay.
questions.
Any questions or comments? Any further questions or comments?
So I'll ask a comment. So just to follow up, so now that you've laid out processes, it would be good to have a little chart, and maybe you put one in here and I didn't see it, but like if you want to change what the tax can be used for, the 1 cent versus what you could adopt a fee for versus changing a project element versus changing an area, it would be really good to have a chart. If you're saying some have to go to all the jurisdictions, some don't. Some have to get an ICA change, some don't. Some have to change a 377B plan here at this body. What comes first? Just for, I am not proposing any changes. I just wanted to know what the terrain was and what was currently included. And really what I was asking, I wanted to know too, on here, I got the area, geographic area, but the 377B plan, this board went further and adopted like 60 projects or something, as part of that 377B plan. And then I understood they were changed. So for example, I'll give you one example. We talked about recreation. I'm not sure what this text does for me, but I was looking at the map. But we adopted initially a recreation plan for the $50 million of land that we bought along Mill and McCarran. So my question is that recreation plan still in the NRS 377B plan? Was it taken out of the NRS 377B plan? Where does it, just one example.
With the passage, we have, the 377B plan is a general description.
Okay?
For example, it just says levies from 395 down
Okay.
to Vista. This board approved the Truckee River Flood Protection Plan that identified the specific elements of the project. Those all fall within that general 377B description. So where those elements are found are within that yellow.
The flood map book.
Exactly.
So for example, another question I had was on the bridges. So originally, Center Street Bridge, Arlington Street Bridge, and Lake Street Bridge were in that plan. I didn't know if they were still in that plan or not, 8 years later, I don't know.
They were actually taken out of the plan and then put back into our plan. Is that correct?
Well, actually, the board has not voted on removal of any of these project elements, and the approval that we have was several years old, circa 2012 or 13.
I believe.
2013 was the last official change. We've talked about what the ramifications are due to the vote, and we can kind of get into that a little bit in the next item. But the plan includes the project elements as this board approved back in 2012. The 377B is, as council said, is more general. The recreational components, those descriptions still are in that 377B plan, and this board has the ability to grab those if you elect to, or not do those.
Okay.
We threw out some of the recreational and the environmental restorative projects when we approved the plan in 2013. Because by approving that plan, we eliminated some of the downstream work. But again, this board has the authority to change that plan easily.
Well, the reason I'm asking is that I'm sure Mr. Smith was here, but I don't know, most of the rest of us were not here on this board in 2013. So we're not as conversant with what might have been adopted in that plan, and I know we went over it at our retreat, but only 3 of us were there at that time, myself, I think, Mr. Smith and Mr. Abbott. And so, or Mr. Houghton, I don't recall, but there was just a subset of this board. And it might be good to redistribute the map, or something just to get us up to speed on what's in, what's out, and what we're talking about.
Due to your comment, that idea already turned on in my mind. We will make sure that you get new copies of the project as it is approved today.
That'd be great. Okay, thank you.
Certainly.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, we're looking for a motion to,
I think just accept the report for now.
is that what you want to accept? the
We
report?
don't need a motion necessarily, Mr. Chair.
We wouldn't need a motion?
No.
All right. Thank you for your work on this. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay, we'll move on to number 3, presentation and discussion on the current plans and efforts to move the development of the Truckee River Flood Protection Plan forward. And is
Thank you,
that,
thank you, Mr. Chair. That will be mine. As I sat down to compose a staff report, my mind went back to the January non-meeting and the fact that we had submitted we had provided a handout for that meeting that's now included in this report. And we went through various options, 3 to be exact. And there's, go ahead and put on that first slide on the handout.
And you called it a non-meeting because we didn't have a quorum.
Because we didn't have a quorum, right. As you can see, and those are taken right out of the staff report, option A being a federal partnership plan. Basically, we maintain our current status with the Corps of Engineers. We build the project as it is known, and we move forward with that. Option B was a regional drainage utility and federal partnership plan, where we expand, as Director Hartung had mentioned, the possibility of this agency taking on a more holistic role in partnership with the communities to try to build some drainage facilities throughout the whole county, in addition to the Truckee River Flood Project. It would require, option B would still require that we maintain a relationship with the Corps of Engineers. And we obviously now know that we're going to have to find additional funding sources. My goal is not to go over this handout. I provided it as backup or an attachment so that you could read it. If the board wants to get into a discussion of it, of the handout, certainly entertain that. But at this point in time, I wanted to present the 3 alternatives that we talked about in January, which serve as the basis for our strategy as staff moving forward. And then C was it says reduced funding plan. I will say significantly reduced funding plan because we would abandon the current plan that we have, and we would develop a reduced plan to build only project features along the Truckee River, given the existing revenues that we have, and or maybe perhaps in conjunction with some fees that would be direct benefit fees. Now, those were the 3 options that we talked about. So what has staff actually been doing? What is the strategy we have followed in that we did not get a pronouncement of direction from the board? What we decided to do, and we thought it prudent, is to maintain our relationship with the Corps of Engineers, still continue to lobby not only the Corps on a local basis, but on a federal or national basis, and try to get basically 2 projects done. One project, really a non-project, was to have them review our 100-year plan that we developed, that is the basis of the plan, the approved plan that this body, this board approved. Keep in mind that the plan that we approved is larger than what the core portion of the project would deal with. The downtown Reno elements were not a part of the core project. They were part of our plan, and we intended to do them given the potential for funding. So what we decided we would do is at least keep the federal portion of the project alive. And the federal portion is defined in loose terms, everything that is east of 395 to the Vista Narrows. That is, in essence, the federal project.
Mr. Hartung has a question.
Sure, please.
Mr. Aldean, and I don't mean to interrupt you. So of the downtown projects in Reno, what's left? We've done the Virginia Street Bridge. What's left?
We have 3 bridges, and I might suggest Lake Street is a really bad bridge as well. Center is not too bad. Sierra is not a good bridge. And we also have, in my opinion, the levee problem where all the trees are along Riverside Drive.
Okay.
That is a very important project element because that's what floods downtown. All that water comes down, gets over the levee. At that point, floods down Riverside Drive, down First Street, floods the current City Hall and parts east. And then it goes back into the river channel about where the ballpark is.
And have we prioritized those?
No, we did not. They were included all holistically to include downtown. The idea was to make sure that the downtown was protected, and it was part of the mission of this agency to do that.
And look, and I understand, I understand the holistic approach. I get that. But when I did my house, I did it one room at a time so as not to disrupt my entire life.
I have a picture of a house that was done that way.
So yeah, and
What could have happened?
If you can afford to move out of your house and completely remodel it, that's very cool. But otherwise, I think what would be wise for us is to prioritize those projects and then prioritize, of course, the projects in Sparks.
Let me continue the discussion. The notion is, in keeping with the core project is basically one project. It is inclusive of a number, probably about 30 elements or so. But it's one project. If the core stays with us, if we're able to get our project reviewed favorably, make whatever changes they are going to suggest, and mind you, they will have changes, then they will want to build the whole project. You will not be able to piecemeal that project. So you have the core project and you have the other elements, so especially downtown. And I'm just mentioning that so that you're aware of.
Perhaps I was unclear, though, and what I mean by, I understand you build the whole project, but you can't do all of them at once.
Oh, of course
You
not.
have to do one element at a time, and that's all I'm talking about is prioritizing the elements themselves.
We always
Which one do you do
have.
first?
We have actually a buildable priority established for the downtown portion. I don't know what every project is in its priority order, but there is a priority order been established, at least from a recommendation standpoint.
Because I know in Sparks, we need to get the North Truckee drain, that, the Vista Narrows, we need to get that finished. That's a crucial element for us.
And thank you for going into my further presentation, because that's exactly what I was going to say. But getting back to the notion here, the Corps of Engineers project, consider it one project. Consider it, if we stay with the Corps, it does not get broken up. The Corps will not allow that to happen and still provide us with our funding. Just keep that in mind. So, and then those are the three options that we talked about. And they're very general concepts and strategies. So what we did is we said, well, it's prudent to keep the federal option open. So as staff, we recommended to this body that the Corps of Engineers be allowed to start reviewing our 100-year plan. And remember, the plan that they're reviewing is just the portion of everything east of 395. And we also thought there would be another benefit that if we could figure out a way to get construction dollars allocated to one little itty-bitty portion of that federal project, that once you do that, you in essence have created an earmark. And you've heard that word, you understand that there are no earmarks. Therefore, if you get a project funded through construction, any small portion of it, then your project is deemed to have started. And once it's started, then it becomes eligible for annual budgeting. So the second project that we are entertaining with the Corps is the Common Features Project. You might also know it as the Mill Terracing Project. I think that's what we've heard it called as well. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So that project, if it gets built, because it has common features between the Corps' 50-year plan and our 100-year plan. There's an element of terracing in both. And so if we build that element of terracing, then we're not wasting money by building projects that we don't want, because eventually we want to build either the Corps project or the federal project. The community doesn't want the Corps project, but the Corps project is always an open alternative according to the Corps. So it all works out. And so that's why we have that.
Bottom line this, I don't want to carry this on for another hour. We've been through this 10 times.
Okay, well, okay, then I will bottom line it. The bottom line is then the second project that we decided to do is the Vista Narrows project, which we felt would provide us with the most benefits, also provide us with the most difficulty in design, and it would be one that we could basically use as a starting point. If the Corps if we decide to part ways with the Corps, then this project would be your first project that we would recommend that we build. And that is fixing the Vista Narrows so that more water can go down the Vista Narrows in the lower canyon, and more benefits are provided. It would be the one that we would use because we can now say that we're going to have benefits, therefore we can charge a fee. It would also be the one that would identify all the problems that are going to occur downstream because we're discharging additional water. And so we started this project a couple years ago with the notion that we would identify all the environmental constraints, all the design constraints, the hydraulic constraints, and we would know firmly once and for all that we have the ability to build a project, a portion of the project that would provide significant benefits to the region. So that is our strategy, and that's what we followed. The board has not told us that we followed this strategy, but you have, in essence, because you followed our recommendations, and this is where, as staff, we have led this group. So if you have any questions, please give them to me. If not, that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Questions or comments?
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Dewar.
I just, so just again, on a bottom line basis, are you going to describe how far we are into this Vista Narrows project? Like,
If you would like, I can have.
are we in design, or when is that due to be finished?
Eric is here, and he will give you a very quick update on the Vista Narrows project.
And maybe we could have the lights up a little for him.
It's up on the wall, up on the.
Notice in the maps that there are dates listed there as to upcoming milestones. You can
Okay.
see that.
Thank you.
And he will be talking to those now. Thank you.
Good morning, directors. Eric Sheets for the record. As you can see, the map of Vista Narrows there is, if you were to talk about priority, this is a project that we're considering of the highest priority right now. The reason being is, once completed, it could lower the water surface by approximately a foot, possibly, let's say, 0.9 feet for not just Sparks, but Washoe County and Reno. So it helps everybody. And with that being said, it also helps us deal with the NFIP issue that the Corps of Engineers has on their local plan. They actually stuck us with about $195 million mitigation cost. This project, as you can see there with the cost estimate of $50 million, is much cheaper than that. So other quick updates on that. When we first estimated this project in 2013, it actually, with contingency, was up in the $80 million range. Still more than half the cost of the core stuff. But through excellent work from our consultants, we've actually got that down to a current dollar figure of about $50 million. Now, please keep in mind that that 2013 number of $80 million was at a cheaper cost as well because of inflation. So I would suggest if we were to compare apples to apples, we've actually cut about half the cost on the Vista Narrows project through excellent design. With that, you can see a schedule there. We have obviously gotten pretty close to getting to the 60% submittal. Now, we are in QC efforts right now. And once we accomplish that 60%, though, we're basically done with this contract. So we're going to, at that point, talk with the Corps, talk with you guys, and see what you want us to do next. Again, we would suggest this as a high priority. It does help everybody.
Just if I may follow up, Mr. Chair?
Ms. Dewar?
Yeah, so the 50 million, whose money is that? Is that the flood? Is that local money? Is that federal money? Whose money?
That would be all the 1/8 cent sales tax money.
Okay, so are we still under like a Section 104, or shouldn't the Corps be funding this at this point, the design? And
That's-
65% of the design and the construction?
Yeah, excellent point. Because it's not part of their 50-year plan, in essence, they kicked out Vista Narrows, they're not contributing towards it. Now, I'll push it back to them, but I think you nailed something there.
So 100% of the cost of the 50 million would be on us because it's not in their plan?
Unless something else was set up.
And is 50 million the whole design and the whole construction cost?
Yeah, and just to be clear, that's the current number, so I would suggest 55 million as when we actually get into construction. But yes, you're correct.
Let me interrupt here. The $50 million is a construction cost. We have not identified where the money would come from. In other words, if we stay with the Corps, which I hope to do, then we include this in the partnership agreement that we negotiate with the Corps of Engineers, and it becomes a project element that they start to contribute to. That's the reason why we only went to a 60% design level. We didn't push it to a 100%. We only wanted to get so far. We wanted to get far enough to know what we had to do, and we wanted to know what the costs were. This is a very critical component. So we're hoping that over the next year, when the Corps gives us the results of their review, if they will start to negotiate a partnership agreement with us, then we will include this as part of that, and then we will be using some of their money as well.
Would the review go up to 100-year protection versus now they're at 50-year protection?
The review is for our 100-year plan, so that answer is yes, it would be for 100-year protection.
So just to capsulize, we don't know if the Corps is going to accept this into a revised plan and actually take our whole project up to 100-year or just this section up to 100-year, and all of that is still to be determined. So we're holding until we get some more clarity before we go. And then I guess my final question would just be, do we have 50 million or can we bond for it? Like, do we have that money?
We are currently saving money. We have, 18 million, $20 million we have saved in not doing some project work, and it still includes us allowing to do small projects such as the Well Street bridge removal. But we have put money away to be able to build this project. If it turns out that that's the only project that this community can build, and the Corps goes away and everybody goes away, we want to be able to build this as quickly as possible.
Okay.
So that's what we're planning for.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
Want common features?
Eric, are you done?
Go ahead.
That's fine. Jay already covered
Yeah.
common features. Thank you.
Okay, so.
Ad nauseum.
Looking for a motion to just continue.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, we'll move on to number 5, discussion regarding a possible amendment to the Truckee River Flood Management Project, interlocal cooperative agreement, voting requirements.
We've already touched on a number of these issues. This is Mike Wolz for the record, by the way. The current ICA requires a unanimous vote for all business of the Flood Authority. In certain instances, such as amending the ICA, the member governments must also vote. In some instances, an affected member government is required to vote, such as a change to any of their codes. But just from a historical standpoint, there was an effort to change the voting structure. It began in 2012 with Washoe County. That would change that to a supermajority of 75% of all those present. That proposal was approved by Washoe County and the city of Sparks. The city of Reno took that issue up on 2 occasions and did not vote. Approximately a year later, they voted to approve a voting change that was different than that voting change that was approved by Washoe County, that would have required at least one member of each government entity to also vote on that. Those changes were agendized for this board on 2 occasions, and no vote was had. And so it was not approved here. So no voting changes were ever made. And that is where that stands historically. And so with that,
I was here then, I don't
Mike,
remember.
I was reading the report, and it talks about Reno doing that. I don't remember that.
I pull-
don't remember it coming back here, because we had it in there about,
One
I
member.
think in our original proposal was, you have 2 members from each entity, and one has to be, at least one member has to vote in the affirmative.
yeah, it took some effort to pull the minutes on that. And, but I was able to get the minutes from the city of Reno on what they did there.
I just remember what happened here.
Right. And, but I think because of the passage of time, it took me, I'll admit, it took me a time to reconstruct the history of how this occurred because of the delays there. In one instance, this board, so it kind of went in this order. The county, then Sparks, then Reno had it on the agenda and tabled it without acting. Then our board had it on the agenda and tabled without acting because they didn't have, they had only had 4 members there, and it was Mayor Martini asked that it be tabled for a later meeting because he felt like every entity should be represented before that was addressed. And then it was raised, and the exact date is in that timeline, July 10th, 2013, so over a year later. That was taken up by the city of Reno, but it was different. It was not the same voting structure proposal that the county and Sparks had looked at. And then that came up. We had a resolution in August of 2013 to approve that, and there was some discussion, and no vote was taken on it.
Mr. Chair? Yeah, thank you so much. I asked for this item just because, again, didn't participate for the last 8 years, really didn't know the history. Believe you, but it seems like there's some confusion or uncertainty, I'll put it. Is it possible that you could provide us your research, so, as a backup to this, like the minutes, both from the flood board and these various jurisdictions, so we actually know what they did and we can, see it for ourselves? And, I had no idea that this had been discussed back then in 2012 and 2013.
Yeah, and let me just very quickly check. I'm going past, in the agenda book, I did provide some material, and I'll admit, I don't recall, since I did this report, I did not provide any minutes. So I will, if you want to have
Just
those,
to
I can
have it as
provide
a
those. Absolutely, I
packet.
actually have them with me, I just need to copy them, and I'll just email those to the board if that would be sufficient.
Mike, I don't want you to put, how many hours is it going to take you to do?
I have all those minutes. It should be more of a matter of minutes. I won't do anything formal, I will just attach them to an email, if that's.
Just so we have a record for this. And then, I'm not making any proposals myself and asking for this. I just wanted to know what the thought process was, in the past, because I know it's always been a discussion item, so.
If I may, if I could
Yeah.
point out a couple of problems with both of the proposals from the standpoint of legal counsel. If you go to a supermajority, you potentially confront the possibility that you could have a quorum of 4 people present, have technically be able to pass something with 3 votes, but under state law, that wouldn't be required. That wouldn't be allowable, because
Right.
it would be less than a majority of the entire board.
Right?
So it really only gives you, it creates a possibility that you could have a quorum and not be able to act.
On
And then-
that item.
On that item, on that particular circumstance. You could also have the same situation if you had the requirement that you needed to have 1 representative from each governmental entity. You could have a quorum of 4, and this occurred just at our very last meeting, where you'd have a quorum of 4, but then you couldn't act because, in that instance, Washoe County had meetings that involved all of their county commissioners, and so they weren't represented. We wouldn't have been able to to approve our 5-year capital improvement plan required by statute. It would have put us in a jam. Now, does that happen frequently? No, but all of these changes do have potential problems under certain circumstances that if we should probably consider before we go too far down the road.
Yeah, as I recall, the original ICA, that was back in 2011, the draft, was signed in 2012, but the original draft had an opportunity to have a majority vote on most items. So 90% of the time, it would be a majority vote, like it is unanimous majority vote. So we have 4 people. We can't vote unless we have a quorum, but if we have 4 people here, all of us have to vote for it. So that already is how it is. I think it was contemplated in that original ICA document that it would only be on the biggest things, adopting the budget, or changing the cooperative agreement, or changing the plan, the 377B plan, that you would need a supermajority, i.e. 5 of 6 people, to vote in the affirmative, 1 from each. So I think in that original ICA, and you might want to go back and look at that, or I could send it over to you, but I think it tried to narrow those opportunities where there would be a problem. And it's important if we're adopting a budget or we're going to change a plan, that all of us are here and agreeing on, those are big momentous decisions for this board. So I think it's right that, we have a large, not just 4 people saying, yeah, let's change the plan, but all of them. So I don't know if your research went back that far, but that's why that was proposed at that time. Essentially, it's unanimous, it's 4 of the quorum, but on bigger things, it was, a larger step. So I don't know, did you go back that far?
I didn't look at the negotiations
Yeah.
documents.
That's where they ended.
I wasn't around when that happened. and-
I understand, but it's all in the records. The flood board, the flood staff have all of that. And it was right up to the 11th hour and 59th minute. That is how the board was going to proceed to the very, very last vote. So, I think it's worth bringing that conversation back, because, the people at the time thought that was a good proposal. But anyway, so thank you for sharing, and if you could just get us your backup, that'd be great.
Okay,
Okay.
I don't know if anyone else
I
has.
have nothing else.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, looking for a motion whether to pursue this at another meeting.
Yeah? What would you like, Mayor?
I think it would be good to have.
Further discussion?
The light doesn't show up.
I think are you, hello?
It's on.
The light's not on.
It was on.
Oh, it was.
I think it's on, it's not on now.
Yeah, I would just like
Hello.
to have any background that you have, because Mr. Hartung told me that in 2012 it was 13 Councilman
13.
Delgado. So, so I'd like to kind of get some information from also Councilman. Obviously, I was on the council then, but I don't remember
Bob was
having
mayor.
that. Yes, he was. I don't remember having that discussion, so anything that you have, I would greatly appreciate it. We don't necessarily have to come back to the board for that, but if the board did want to have further discussion.
That's what I'm looking for in a
Yeah.
motion if you want to continue this.
All right, then I'll motion to proceed.
Okay, do I have a second?
Thank you.
I'll second, I guess, for further discussion.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Anybody? Okay.
Becky get the motion?
We have a motion and a second. See no more discussion. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Passes unanimously.
Just for clarification, for my purposes, the motion, I think, was to proceed with further discussion. You would like to have that on an upcoming agenda
Yeah.
after
And-
we've compiled
And
that,
something,
correct?
and also, Mr. Wools, what I'd like, if the board would indulge me in some additional information, I'd like an analysis of the benefits
Good idea.
versus the liabilities
Yeah.
of having this voting structure. Because to be honest with you, I think this voting structure it's unique, but it has worked extremely well. I have not seen any of the elements, anyone be an obstructionist to the elements, at least in the makeup of
And
this
I don't mean
board.
to be negative, but you can literally have one board member that,
You can. That
on-
is absolutely
I'm just
true.
being honest, on my board.
Well, and that.
If that
and
were the
but
case,
That's a,
I'm
that's
not
a,
so sure we would get a lot done.
that's a two-edged sword.
Do you
Well,
see?
it's working.
Well, no, I get it,
Yeah,
but my thought was, I'd like to kind of know a little bit why, Councilman Delgado felt that way, or the rest of the
It
council.
wasn't Councilman Delgado that insisted, it was Dave Iazzi that wanted it in.
No. When it came back in 13, Dave wasn't on the board any longer.
It didn't come back here, we never saw it again.
Well,
It went to the council.
Oscar said they didn't want to do it.
That was, at Reno, they didn't want to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think by way of history, there was a period of time, there was about 6 months, where we could not, there were repeated votes on Mr. Aldean's contract.
And this is not laying it on
And
Oscar.
it kind of came in
He just-
response to that.
I'm not saying
That's right,
this
I
is-
remember that.
This isn't the best way if we're all rowing in the
Yeah,
same
this is-
direction.
this
I
is-
think that's great.
this is-
But let's be honest, if you put down another, council member or commissioner at some point, I'm just saying from my experience on my own board, like I said, we probably wouldn't get anything done.
And just for matter of reference and historic reference, Councilman Delgado, it wasn't his direct opposition. He came and just basically said that his board was not, the city council was not supportive of a change at this time. That's my recollection.
That's
Yeah.
truthful.
And maybe
That's
they're
true.
not.
Well, you're saying that was 2013, and
That's
it's a
correct.
different council now?
That's correct.
Mr. Chair, if I may, one more thing. It was brought up that, well, this has never been a question, but I'll just take us a little further back in history, historic context. When there was discussion about the Virginia Street Bridge, and this was something I lived through, the challenge came up that Mr. Guston from Reno was on the board at that time. And he lived in the oldest house in Reno. His wife was on the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And he felt in all good conscience, he cannot vote to take down the Virginia Street Bridge. And so he was going to vote no, and we would not have done that project, just because of his personal beliefs. But he said he did not want to hold up the project. And so what we did was we crafted a motion at that time that would give every alternative but tearing down the bridge to be evaluated, and we spent 2 years doing that, so that he could, in good conscience, vote for tearing down the bridge, the oldest bridge in Nevada. And so it's those kind of things where a person has a personal belief about something, whether it's home elevation, bridges, narrows, restorations, recreations, whatever, it allows a person to be themselves without having pressure to make or break the entire decision process. So that was an example of several instances that came up in the first 6 years of the flood project. Maybe in the last 8 years, there's been no such problem.
Well, during that time, there was a lot of turmoil on this board. And at any time, we could have stopped the construction of that bridge, and we never did it, because it was the right thing to do.
Right.
So,
But I mean, Mr. Guston had personal,
well, no, I realize,
challenge.
I remember that. But there was a lot of turmoil. We didn't stop the bridge, and we could have. We did the envisioning of what you expected and everything
Yeah.
down there, so it was all paid for by this committee.
Yeah.
But it just, we have not had a problem with this consensus voting, although in the beginning, we were all against it.
Yeah.
So,
Another example was,
but, it's time to get off of this, though.
Yeah,
That's the thing. We've already
fine.
voted on this.
yeah.
Okay. We're moving on. The TAC. Is that Danielle?
It is, yes.
Number 6.
And you have the report before you. I would like to make one slight correction. There is a mistake, a typo in the agenda. It will be corrected for our next meeting. I am not the TAC chair. That is a public body, and they actually elect their own officers. And right now, Trevor Lloyd from Washoe County is serving as the TAC chair. So my apologies for having that in the agenda. Trevor is not here today. However, if you have any questions, I am happy to answer those questions for
Okay.
you.
Any questions from the TAC?
Just one quick comment or
Ms. Stewart.
question. Danielle, I've noticed, we get notice of the agendas and stuff, and it seems like a fair amount of meetings have been canceled. Is that because there's just no, and maybe it's the TAC or maybe it's a working group, I haven't tracked it, but is that because there's no key decisions to be made right now? Is that what's going on?
Yes, so when staff works on the agendas for the FMA meetings, we go through those agendas and try to figure out what would be appropriate for the TAC and the working group to discuss. And those two groups discuss different topics. You know, the TAC is a technical advisory committee, so it doesn't really deal with financial decisions and things like that. And so when we feel that we have, we've got milestones to present or decisions for them to make, then we
Okay.
bring them together, noting that everyone's time is,
Precious. And I assume there's just not a lot for them to talk about right now, so, okay,
Well, we've
thanks.
got a lot of things in progress, and we haven't moved to any sort of quarterly meeting schedule or something like that, because we want to retain that placeholder on everyone's
I got you.
schedule, just in case.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Okay, looking for a motion to accept the report.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Working group, Danielle, that's you as well.
It is, yes, so that's another meeting that I facilitate. You have the report in front of you in your packet, and there are several members from the working group here. So if they wanted to make any comments, this is their
it's really
time to do that. And otherwise, I will bring it back to the board.
Okay, any questions or comments? Seeing none, looking for a motion to accept the report, please.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, I'll open up the public comment. Anybody in the public wishing to speak at this time? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the authority. Member comments. Any comments, future agenda items?
Just, I had asked for a number of future agenda items. I think they're coming, right, in future meetings. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, without objection, we are adjourned.
Thank you.